How many true trustworthy closers will there be on opening day? How many true shaky closers will there be on opening day? How many true committees will we have? I've got Rick Graham, the editor-in-chief and senior relief pitcher analyst at PitcherList, here to help me answer all those questions and more on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Hello and welcome everybody to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast brought to you by Fantrax. Erik Halterman here, excited to be joined by my Tout Wars NL co-competitor and a relief pitcher expert, Rick Graham of PitcherList. Rick, have you figured out every single bullpen situation? I hope so, because that's what we'll be talking about for the bulk of today's show.
Yeah, I think we're down to the point where it's probably about 8 to 10 that we're still wondering about, which is a lot. See, that's like, a third of the league. But yeah, it's sometimes you just don't get the answer and how things will shake out until opening day. But that's we're here to try to figure out, read the tea leaves and sort through all that mess.
Yeah, I think that most of what we were going to learn during spring training has been learned. Hopefully we get one or two bits of official confirmation over the next couple days, but maybe we'll see an Emilio Pagan situation like we saw last year, somebody nobody was really talking about. I was looking back at last year's Tout Wars NL auction, and we took 5 different relievers, none of which were Pagan. So sometimes the 6th guy jumps in out of nowhere on the opening weekend. So, of course, everything we say here today is pending the results of the first actual games, but we'll get to all that reliever talk later in the show. Before that, we'll do a little bit of a review of our Tout Wars NL only draft from last weekend. But as always, would like to start things off with the headlines. And this time of year, we get a whole bunch of who's on the roster, who's off the roster type news, including some outfielders. Dylan Cruz is going to miss out on the opening day roster. Todd and Clay talked about that one a bit on yesterday's podcast. Also, Jason Dominguez of the Yankees not on the opening day roster. Cruz probably more unexpected there. You figured a team like the Nationals was just going to give their young guys the chance to show that they really did deserve playing time, whereas Dominguez didn't seem to have an obvious role. But I'm curious, Rick, if you had drafted either of those guys earlier in draft season, are you holding on or are you just cutting bait?
I think with Cruz, you probably want to hold on. You probably took him a little bit earlier than you would have taken Dominguez anyway. And I know, and it is still shocking. I know Cruz was struggling this spring, so I guess it makes sense. But you look at the rest of that Nationals outfield, and there's going to be a path to playing time at some point for him. You'd imagine. Dominguez, on the other hand, yeah, I don't know. He probably needs an injury at this point, or to just really, set AAA on fire in the first month to get a call up. I do think that that's a guy the Yankees probably at this point need to look to move if they're trying to add to their major league team. Because I just don't see a spot for Dominguez. But yeah, Cruz, I think they're hoping that he can figure some things out in AAA and get up to the major league club pretty quickly, I would imagine.
All right, so maybe hold on to Cruz. Maybe even if you're doing a late draft, you take him with your last pick the same way you'd take a prospect. You say he's still basically a prospect, even though he's had some big league time.
Yeah, that's kind of I think that's not a bad idea. And his ADP is going to tank this weekend, so yeah, you could probably get him for the last pick.
Right, setting yourself up with a little bit of a difficult situation to monitor throughout the early part of the season, but could still pay off, certainly. Speaking of young outfielders, one who did officially make the team is Justin Crawford of the Phillies. This was not unsurprising. The Phillies have made this clear since November, basically, that Crawford was just going to be handed the role in center field. He has risen up draft boards as more and more people have realized that is definitely going to happen, and now it's been officially confirmed by the team. I would not turn down a chance to talk up Justin Crawford again, though. Really interesting late round player who will almost definitely get you single-digit homers, but will also very likely get you quite a few steals and maybe even a decent batting average as well. Are you in on Justin Crawford, Rick?
Yeah, especially, now that we know that he's making the team. That's actually, when you talk about NL tout, that was the value I thought. And it wasn't a guy I was necessarily targeting, but he went for single digits. And I think that's a really good value there. Because, it's always hard to find steals especially when you can get cheap steals. And yeah, that's if he's going to be their everyday center fielder. Yeah, that's a really good value. Who's not going to tank your batting average or on base percentage like maybe a Victor Scott. I think so. At least I think Crawford's got a little bit better bat to ball skill. So yeah, I'm in on Crawford, especially his value hasn't skyrocketed yet. Maybe this weekend, now that we know he made the team, his ADP goes up. But for now, I'm in.
Yeah, Crawford, while he never has had double-digit homers in the minors, that's more due to an extreme ground ball approach than an inability to actually make hard contact. He hits the ball decently hard,
Yeah.
which should help that batting average. I think guys who hit it often but incredibly weak sometimes end up hitting 250ish. That was Caleb Durbin's problem last year. He had a single-digit strikeout rate, but bottom-tier exit velocities, and so it didn't result in a great average. I don't think Justin Crawford is that guy, so I think there could really be something there. Phil Hertz grabbing him for $8 in NL only Tout Wars could end up looking pretty good. Should we move into the rotation, though? I've got a whole bunch of rotation news, including Zebby Matthews missing out to Mick Abel. That one was discussed also yesterday by Todd and Clay. Got some more news just after that, though. Braxton Garrett is out of the Marlins rotation, somebody I liked before his Tommy John surgery and thought he was a reasonable bet at a very cheap price, but he is out, and Jansen Junk is in. Jansen Junk, an extreme control guy, somebody whose walk rate was, 2.9% last year. Normally I don't go to the decimal, but if it's under 3, I feel like we have to there.
Yeah.
A guy who walks no one. Is that at all interesting to you? It's got to be at least a reasonably deep league, right? Because Junk doesn't strike out many batters, but that's an outlier skill.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's not gonna do damage to your whip. So there's something there, and 15 plus teamers maybe. But yeah, he doesn't have, his last name like kind of precedes him. It's not much velocity there, just kind of mixes in a bunch of pitches, and he can be effective at times, but not someone I'm super excited about. But again, I guess depending on your team build, if you're a little bit worried about your whip being inflated, maybe Junk's a fine last starter to roster, and you see how things play out.
Yeah, and if I'm remembering right, I believe his first start of the year is going to be home against the Chicago White Sox. So if you can get him for that,
yeah,
I'm taking for at least one start. Speaking of pitchers who can help your whip, Zach Eflin is in the Orioles rotation because Dean Kramer has actually been sent down. Bit of a surprise there. Dean Kramer, nothing special, but a reliable back-end starter for a few years now. It looks like the Orioles will instead have a full rotation with Trevor Rogers, Kyle Bradish, Chris Bassett, Shane Baz, and Zach Eflin. Eflin struggled last year while dealing with injuries, but has not given up a run in 2 spring starts. Looks like 10 strikeouts against 1 walk in 7 1/3 innings. You like Zach Eflin at all as a last pitcher or two on your rotation?
Yeah, I'm kind of in on Eflin. His velocity's been up a little bit this spring. He's looked good, results wise as well. Which in spring it's not the most important thing, but yeah, and I think you're going to get and the AL East obviously can be tough to pitch in, but good, pretty good team context in Baltimore where he should be in the mix for wins. And yeah, I think he's been someone I've been able to grab pretty like really late in drafts. You passed pick 300, so yeah, as a last SP, or last 1 or 2 SPs, yeah, that's someone I'm looking into, especially because I think that the rotation spot should be his for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it's as long as his body holds up. Eflin's somebody
Yeah.
who gets hurt a lot, but it tends not to be arm issues. He's got knees and backs and things like that. But if he's healthy now, I think he's going to be pretty useful. He's not that old, just 31, turns 32 in early April. So should be able to give you some low whip outings, at least for as long as his body holds up there. Some more rotation news. Logan Allen, the Cleveland Guardians version, is now, I guess, Logan Allen, the Columbus Clippers version or whatever they are there. He has been sent down, which means all 3 of Slade Cecconi, Joey Cantillo and Parker Messick are all in the Guardians rotation to start the year. I think fantasy players are happy with this one. I have not heard anyone stump for Logan Allen this season, but I have heard a decent amount of fans of Ciccone, Cantillo, and Messick. Are you leaning towards any of that trio? Happy to have all three of them in the rotation?
I think they're all, someone to look at, especially you talk about Guardians pitching and this trio has, a little bit of prospect hype around each of them at one point or another. I think, yeah, you take a chance on one of them at the end of your draft, see how things play out. I don't know, not sure what their early season schedule is, but if they have good matchups early on, then yeah, I think you might even want to bump them up a little bit more. But yeah, you know, last one of these guys in the Guardians rotation, yeah, I'm definitely perks my ears up as someone I'd be interested in.
Yeah, Messick is the guy who has interests me, somebody who in 7 starts last year, he didn't have amazing stuff, but a lefty who had slightly better than average strikeout and ground ball rate while walking just 3.6% of opposing batters. That's pretty interesting, although the way we have projected the rotation to start the year, Messick's first outing might be at the Dodgers. So I'm not sure I want that one. At the Dodgers, then home against the Cubs. Looks like his potential schedule there, whereas Ciccone and Cantillo might go at Seattle and then home against the Cubs. So we'll see how that rotation shakes out, but certainly interested in some of those names. One final bit of pitcher news. This will transition us nicely into a bit of Tout Wars review, because you took Didier Fuentes with your second reserve round pick, somebody who shot up the minors last year too quickly and really was not good at all in the majors. You can hardly blame him for that. He was just 20 years old. This year, Fuentes has been having an outstanding spring. I almost don't believe the stat line in front of me. 9 innings, 0.00 ERA, 0.00 whip, 0.0% walk rate, and a 63% strikeout rate. That's not bad. Unfortunately, Fuentes for now is only being given a bullpen role, but there's some real potential here, and there are some guys like Bryce Elder and Grant Holmes and Reynaldo Lopez in front of him. Can't imagine it's too long before Fuentes moves into the rotation. It's a good idea to pick him, at least in the reserve rounds, even though he's just a reliever, right?
Yeah, and even as a reliever, there might be some value there. But you're hoping that. I mean, I can't imagine Bryce Elder is long for that fifth rotation spot, especially with how Fuentes has looked this spring, and just, there's a huge difference in stuff between Fuentes and Elder. So I think it's kind of like that, Spencer Strider situation 2022, where he started in the bullpen and then by late May he was in the rotation. I think for Fuentes, it might even be earlier for Fuentes, just given the, what the rotation looks like right now. So yeah, I think by May we'll see him in the rotation. But even as a reliever, especially if he's getting bulk innings, there might be some value there too. Especially this spring is basically, over 9 innings, not allowing a base runner and having, I think, like 17 strikeouts. Yeah, it's spring, but it's still we love to see that type of dominance from a guy like Fuentes.
Yeah, for sure. So intrigued to see how long it takes before he gets into the rotation, but I think you got to add him now so that you have him when he does make it. We should take a quick look at last week's NL Tout Wars, which Rick and I competed in together in New York City last Sunday. Rick, if I'm guessing, neither me nor you has had a ton of deep only league experience before joining this league. As a general rule, if you've been playing fantasy baseball since the 90s or earlier, then you probably played a lot of deep only leagues. But if you were a small child in the 90s, you probably played a lot of, 10 and 12 team mixed leagues. And so this is something that is relatively new, I think, to both of us. And so far, I've been okay, but you have actually had a couple good finishes, a second and a third over the last couple of years. What have you picked up? What has worked for you in this deep NL only league that might not work in other formats?
Yeah, I mean, I think, my first year finishing in last was, I didn't really, my first time ever in a deep like NL only or any only league. And I kind of went for the safety, like I'll just spend a little bit of money at every position and make sure like I have a full roster, and that didn't work out. So, and not that I've never been like a huge like stars and scrubs guy. Like we have some people in our league who are and it works out for them. But I did, realize that even my second year, I wasn't planning like my plan that my draft wasn't not how I planned it, but it's still, afterwards I felt okay about it. And, I wasn't planning on spending as much on like Trey Turner, but, I usually don't spend much on steals. So that's, just adjustments that like, if that I had to make for an NL only, where the shallower league, just making sure that you have some steals, and you because with waivers, and that's something we talked about a little bit like last weekend. It's that's like the next part is like how to navigate like the whole waiver situation like better, because it's a lot of fourth outfielders out there, right-handed platoon guys and infielders. So it's not, sometimes you hit on a guy, but it's really hard to. So the draft does mean a little bit more. And yeah, the last 2 years been trying to prioritize offense over pitching, which has kind of worked out. But last year my pitching was why I couldn't, make a jump to second or first. So that's kind of been, especially with infielders in this, that's where I target it. And that's clearly with my draft, it's, infield heavy, but I don't know. It's different year to year. It's I think, with our third year in it now, and kind of getting to the feel of how other guys in the league kind of draft, and how certain, like Phil is always going to get his Mets guys, Brian likes his Cardinals guys. So it's almost like you have to either overvalue them or just you kind of ignore them and move on to other guys, other teams for certain guys and positions to fill. But yeah, I don't know. It's still, I feel like I have a better handle of it, but still not quite fully grasped the whole NL only concept yet.
Yeah, it's definitely the in-season management that I've found I've struggled
Yeah.
with the most. I've liked my draft every year, and I have yet to finish higher than fifth, in part because, as you said, there's just no one to pick up who seems actually good, and because the bar to be playable in a league like this is so low, it's
Right.
actually harder to find guys to cut. I've found
Yeah.
if I bothered to put this guy on my roster in the draft or 2 weeks ago or whatever, it's probably because he's got at least something. So why do I cut him for the next guy who has almost nothing? I just haven't figured out that balance. But I do want to take a quick look at your team. You pointed out that you did not spend as much on pitching, just I think it was $72 here. You did not go with any expensive closer, right? We'll
Yeah.
talk about some of the guys that you took, but Paul Sewald and Ryan Stanek, you're just shooting for the number 2 or 3 guys and a couple wide open bullpens there, leaving, if you're going to spend left on pitching, at least you still have a competitive rotation. Was that the goal?
Yeah, and I figured, last year I did spend on closers, and I forget, I had 2 or 3 guys, and I had a pretty big lead in saves, which was nice. But then trying to move closers, like closers tend to be over or undervalued in mid-season when you're trying to make moves. And I wanted to, I figured if, especially like playing to my strengths and someone who follows bullpens, I wanted to, spend the money, spend the assets, towards offense and starters. Whereas I can hopefully figure out at least one in-season closer. And I feel pretty confident about Paul Sewald being, at least getting saves early in the season. So I won't be a net negative there. But yeah, I think last year my rotation was a mess, and I made moves in season to add starters, but it just, my ERA and WHIP were really low, and I can never really, make up that gap once you fall behind in the first half of the season. So I'm hoping, and then you guys like Ohtani and Glasnow, obviously there's risk there, there's injury risk there, but at least with Glasnow, we have an IL. If Glasnow misses time, I can, just stash him there. And then, yeah, hoping that the other guys can put together just, solid seasons to start. But I feel like, yeah, we talk about in-season moves. I feel like pitching, usually there's a way to navigate, I think, pitching on the wire better than with hitters. Where like you mentioned, like I picked up like Brett Wisely last year, and it's like, oh, he's going to be the second baseman against righties, for the next couple weeks, and that's okay that he's got a role there, but then he he goes 1 for 27, and it
Right.
just it doesn't really help me in any category. So yeah, I think with pitchers, at least I feel a little bit better about streaming them as compared to hitters in this league.
Yes, we may end up needing to do some streaming depending on how long Otani and
Yeah.
Glasnow stay on the mound. Bubba Chandler, too, I suppose, potentially some workload questions about him. Andrew Abbott should at least be there all
Yeah.
season long. Over on the hitting side, though, you had the budget to have a very expensive infield. Ketel Marte for 31, Matt Olson for 28, Manny Machado for 26, and Bo Bichette for 20. You also got Hunter Goodman for 22 as your fifth hitter over $20. Any of those guys ones you're particularly happy to land, or were you just trying to get good bats at all four infield spots and catcher?
Yeah, I wanted to. Last year, I punted on catcher, and that was a pain. Especially, I took Augustin Ramirez in the reserve round, but he didn't. He didn't come up until May, June. So the first 2 months were just I was getting nothing out of the catcher spot. And I know Goodman's not, he's not a great OBP asset, but at least the power's there. I think there are, between Olson and, Marte to a degree. I have, some on base guys. I feel I didn't want to go above 30 for Marte, but that second base position just, kind of scares me. Although I will say NL is a better situation for a second baseman than the AL. I don't even know the options over there outside of Jazz. But yeah, I think Machado, I like Machado. There's a pretty deep third base group on the NL as well. But Machado has always been just a solid, for a guy in this league where you just want guys who are going to be there every day. Olson and Machado, I feel I'm pretty comfortable with in the corners. And Bichette, I don't know. I feel like that might be a little bit of a low price for him. I think there's probably some concerns with him being able to stay healthy and transitioning to third base in New York. But he should hit in the top middle part of that lineup, in either ahead of Soto or in between Soto and Lindor. And I just think he's going to be a safe, option, who eventually will also, get third base eligibility. So that gives me some flexibility there as well.
Yeah, it looks like a pretty reasonable lineup to me. You spread the wealth much more than I did. I count 5 hitters who cost at least 20 and 8 who were at least double digits. On my end, I ended up more expensive than expected at the top of my hitter pool. I don't know if you come into the draft with set values, but I come in with set values that I know I'm going to ignore. I just don't normally ignore them to this extent. It's just nice to have something down on the paper so that if I went $5 over, then I have $5 to spend around. Very rare that happens, or sorry, actually very common that happens. Very rare that I get the reverse. I had 3 outfielders or 3 hitters go for at least 33, but all of whom were a little bit cheaper than I had as my max bid, whereas most of the other top hitters were more expensive. So I ended up with Kyle Tucker for 36, Corbin Carroll for 35. I think the room might have been a little bit scared of his hamate bone, so I got a $2 or $3 deal there.
I'm kicking myself about the Carroll one. Yeah, that's a good deal.
That one could end up looking pretty good if he is back right away. And Kyle Schwarber, I think in this format, this is an OBP league, so suddenly Schwarber's a 4-category star, not a 3. And this is a league with 1 util spot and 2 swings, which can be a hitter or a pitcher. So it's effectively 3 utility. So I don't even care that he's a util only at all. But since I spent up on those 3 guys, none of them are infielders. I had to scrounge around for anybody with a job in the infield. Carlos Santana for 3, Nolan Gorman for 7, Bryson Stott 16, and Joey Ortiz for 5. In a league this deep, do you have a preference for expending in the outfield versus the infield, or do you just take whichever one seems like a better deal that day? I mean, that's my approach, and I've ended up with various builds. Sometimes I'm expensive in the infield, sometimes the outfield, sometimes a mix.
Yeah, I think, and I think I kind of was a little bit shy on the Tucker and Carroll. Both of them, I was really, I had 30s, 34, 35 values, and it's like early in the drafts, I don't want to go too above where I have them valued. But yeah, those are two. And same with Schwarber too, like you said, in this util only. That's a guy who, those three I should have been more excited about, because my outfield will play. Like there's these guys are going to be, I kind of went with the outside of Laureano. It's like, Harris, Paz, Bader, like they have center field jobs, so they're going to be in the lineup. But I don't know. It could be a net negative, especially if a guy like Paz, if he's not, because he's not a big on base guy anyway. So yeah, I think like you said, it's more, especially now that we'll just have the one infielder spot, where I think 2 years ago we had corner infield and middle infield. You don't need to prioritize infield as much. So yeah, I think the way the league, especially with those 2 or 3, realistically 3 util spots, you don't have to worry about position as much. But I do feel from like the past 2 years, if you're trying to find someone on the waiver wire, typically outfield is a little bit deeper than any infield spot. I guess it probably depends year to year, and also on what type of prospects are coming up. But I feel like outfield's a little bit easier to navigate there. But yeah, I think, just getting the better values for hitters at this point, the way the league is set up format wise, is the way to go.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. There are definitely some times where you're searching for a shortstop and there's literally 2 who are going to play any games this week. All right,
Yeah.
I guess you'll take that one. Not great. Over on the pitching side, I did manage to go with one clear top closer, Joan Duran, for 22. Actually was the 4th most expensive in this league after Mason Miller, Devin Williams, and Edwin Diaz. So I was happy with that. Got one ace in Freddie Peralta, and then a lot is going to be resting on Jacob Mizrowski and Edward Cabrera, both for 12. If they stay healthy, I like those values a lot, particularly Mizrowski, who is $5 cheaper than Chase Burns, for example. But this rotation certainly has the ability to collapse. Of course, last year I spent up on 3 aces, Logan Webb, Dylan Cease, and Aaron Nola, and that collapsed as well. So a lot of downside with pretty much any rotation in a league this deep.
Yeah, that's why I get a little, I shy away from pitching a little bit. But I mean, outside of, I think you do have one of the better pitching staffs, like based on money spent. And Peralta, I think, was a really good price at 23. He belongs in that tier with like Logan Webb, and I don't know about Sanchez, but like he should have been probably in the 25 plus range. And then yeah, like I mean, Cabrera and Mizrowski are high upside still, even for Cabrera, who's been around for a while, but there's something there. And then Painter and Ryan Nelson too. I think Nelson was a guy I threw out and was interested in. I think I didn't have the money at that point to go to $6, but yeah, Nelson's a nice safe, 5th starter for you. So I like this staff, and yeah, that's something I need to go above $20 maybe next year for a starter, because that's something I tend to shy away from. But then yeah, seeing you get Peralta for 23, I was like, I probably could have been more aggressive there.
Yeah, a lot of these starters went for 29 exactly.
Yeah,
Skeens went for 40, but Webb and Sanchez and Chris Sale were all 29. Yamamoto was 28. So to get Peralta for $5-6 cheaper, I was happy with that. We are going to get over to the main topic of today's show right after this message from our sponsor, Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, and redraft and best ball leagues. Coming from another service, Fantrax makes it easy. Fantrax can import any of your current leagues and customize if needed. Fantrax offers the most in-depth player pool in the industry, including minor league players. Do you need a customizable commissioner service for your fantasy league? Fantrax offers more customization than any other platform. Waivers, categories, scoring system, schedule. Fantrax offers custom solutions for all that and more, and it's all free. Sign up for free today. Simply go to fantrax.com/rotowire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/rotowire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. And welcome back, everybody, to the Saturday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Erik Halterman here with Rick Graham of PitcherList. who we should now use his official title, the senior relief pitcher analyst, because it's going to be quite relevant to the rest of today's show. What we are going to be doing here is looking around the league at different categories of teams depending on how sure their closer is. We're going to go pretty quickly through some of the ones where it's very obvious what's going on, and then we'll spend some more time on some of the less certain situations. So, Rick, the first category I have here is teams with safe, proven, elite closers. These are basically set and forget guys who I'm pretty sure if you drafted them, they're going to be in your lineup all year, barring injury, of course. I'll just read off all 8 teams, and you can tell me if you disagree on any of them. The Dodgers with Edwin Diaz, the Guardians with Cade Smith, the Mariners with Andres Munoz, the Mets with Devin Williams, the Padres with Mason Miller, the Phillies with Joan Duran, the Red Sox with Aroldis Chapman, and the Yankees with David Bednar. And that was in alphabetical order, not in rank order or anything like that. But do you object to any of those 8 teams being put in the safe, proven, elite closer category?
Not really. If I'm gonna push back on one, it's probably Bednar.
Okay.
But I'm torn between him, and he's like a first/second tier guy for me right now, where I think there's some safety there, but I don't know if he has the same, I don't know if he's in that elite upside. He's definitely not with like Mason Miller or Edwin Diaz upside range, but I'm not even sure if like he can get to where Devin Williams or Andres Munoz or Duran in a good year. I don't know if that's the type of guy Bednar is, and I'm not too concerned about most velocities this spring, but he has been down, 2.5, 3 miles per hour. I think he'll be fine, but I still have him like the start of that next tier, still the 8th reliever closer off the board for me, but in that start of that next second tier that we're about to get to.
Right, so maybe Bednar belongs in the safe for now, but not fully trustworthy category. Is he untrustworthy enough that you'd actually bother rostering the next man up, or not quite yet? I think that was one of the main dividers that I was going with here.
I don't think so. I mean, he's safer. I feel a lot better than him about Bednar than like Camilo Doval. So I don't think. I think he's got a safe, and he's going to have a pretty long leash, even if he does get off to a slow start, I believe. So, I think that's probably, it's definitely in the safe, proven category. Maybe the elite part is where I'm just not quite sure yet.
Yeah, fair enough. It could end up giving you better stats than his actual talent level if he just keeps the job, though, because the Yankees should win plenty of games. The next category will go more slowly through these guys, although some of them you might tell me basically belong right with David Bednar in the previous category. These are closers who are safe for now, but not fully trustworthy. So either there's another guy there who's actually probably good enough to take the job, or there's some questions about their talent level or perhaps how long they've pitched well enough to be a closer. The Blue Jays, the first guys here, Jeff Hoffman has been quite good. There were worries about declining velocity, and at some point in the early offseason, he was coming at a nice discount because there was a thought the Blue Jays would bring someone else in. Does Hoffman belong in this category, or would you say he's at least at the Bednar level of a borderline elite, safe, proven closer?
I think I think he and Bednar kind of in that same category where we can chalk up last year for Hoffman as a fluke. He's not going to allow 15 home runs again. He's already talked about throwing his fastball less and throwing his breaking ball more, which ironically was, there's a breaking ball that Rojas hit a home run off him in the World Series, but most of the home runs came off his fastball last year. And I think the Blue Jays did make an effort to add to that bullpen and potentially add a closer. They were in on some closers allegedly, but I don't know if they ever made any offers. They ended up with, Tyler Rogers is a great bullpen piece, but he's not a threat to take Hoffman's job. The only, they've talked about Jimmy Garcia potentially being like a ninth inning guy for them, but he's going to start the year on the IL. So Hoffman's got at least the beginning of the year to take that role, run with it. And I think, he's looked good this spring. I fully expecting a bounce back from Hoffman this year.
All right, so Hoffman, probably one of the best that we'll talk about in this section, not too far from David Bednar in the previous one. The next team is a different sort of situation here. That's the Braves, who definitely will be using Raisel Iglesias as the closer to start the year. That's my understanding, but he counts as not fully trustworthy because they went out and paid Robert Suarez some real money. 3 years, $45 million there. Iglesias is on real money as well, but $16 million expires at the end of this season, and of course was removed from the role for a time last year. Both guys are pitching well this spring, and my read of it is that if Iglesias pitches well all year, he's not going to lose the job, but we do have to count him as not fully trustworthy, right? If Suarez is out pitching him in April, even, they could make a switch, right?
Yeah, I mean, Iglesias is a guy that I am very worried about. It's not necessarily how he's pitched, or like, I think he's still a good reliever. Just clearly, the Braves don't feel confident in him being their closer. They ended up with Suarez, but they wanted Edwin Diaz. I mean, they gave Edwin Diaz a 5-year offer, and if Edwin Diaz had signed with the Braves, if he took the years over the AAV, Diaz would be closing. I mean, there's no way Diaz wouldn't be closing because of Raisel Iglesias being there. So I think Suarez is their preferred closer at some point. It's just a matter of when. We'll see. I mean, Iglesias the last 2 years has gotten off to a slow start. If it happens again, then we could get a quick hook, and Suarez is closing games in April. There's just too much uncertainty with him, and I know he made a lot of changes, and he got things on track in the second half last year, but it was from throwing his fastball more often, and his fastball is not very, very good. It's just the hitters were just sitting on his slider. He allowed like 7 home runs on 90 sliders thrown to start the year. So, yeah, we'll see how Iglesias is able to, adjust as hitters adjust to his adjustments. So it's just kind of a back and forth. But I just, I feel a lot better about Suarez there. I think he's the better pitcher, and yeah, they signed him to be the closer of the future. It's just, when at this point.
Right. Do you feel enough better about Suarez that you'd actually draft him at price? It looks like in the NFBC main event, he's going just inside pick 200, which is not early, but it's not late for a guy who is, again, definitely a setup man. There's no doubt that it's Iglesias to start the year at least.
Mm-hmm. If he inside 200, I'm out. I've taken him in my Earth League and Nerf. I ended up with him, but it was it kind of fell to like after 200, 220 range, and I was like, you know what, I probably could take a shot on him here, at least to start the year. I think he's a good bet for ratio help and some strikeouts, but I don't have a ton of faith in Iglesias there, and I don't think the Braves do as well. So yeah, I think around 200, it's okay to take Suarez, but it depends on what your situation is. I think with your first closer, because if you're taking him as like your first closer, or you took a guy like Trevor McGill or Griffin Jax as your first reliever, then you probably want someone who's going to get you saves, like a Ryan Walker or whoever else after that. But yeah, I do see the upside play in Suarez. The price is still a little bit too high to fully condone.
All right, the next team up here in the safe for now but not fully trustworthy category, I put the Cubs and Daniel Palencia here. I think having seen him at the WBC, he certainly looks talented enough to be a shutdown closer, and he could well be among the league leaders in saves this year. The only reason I have him here is he hasn't been a closer for a full year yet, and he missed some time due to injury last year. But I think I'm pretty happy to draft Daniel Palencia at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit like obviously he was electric in the WBC. Like I guess you can be a little concerned about the workload and him just being so amped up that he's throwing 100 miles per hour every night, which most of these relievers are easing their way into the season. So I guess you could have some injury concern there. But I mean, what we saw in the WBC is that he's electric. There's a way for him to, if he's healthy this year, you could see him being in that top tier next year when we're talking about drafting closers. So yeah, I have him. I think I have him with like the Hoffman Bednar group, where he's got the role. Like they already, they were quick to say like he's going to be our closer. And yeah, the upside there, I think he's added he's throwing his splitter a little bit more in the World Baseball Classic, which is interesting because it's a really good pitch for him. It's kind of, it reminds me of when Jeremiah Estrada, added his splitter, and that kind of, led to him taking off as a reliever. So I'm fully excited about Palencia, and there are some options behind him, but they're not like, Phil Maton's not a closer type really, and Hunter Harvey, can he stay healthy as well? So I feel solid about Palencia as that next group, that the top of that like second tier of closers.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. Another guy who might be at the top of this second tier of closers is Pete Fairbanks of the Marlins. I have him in the not fully trustworthy category, mostly because his strikeout rate has fallen pretty far the last couple years. He has seasons in the high 30s and low 40s in strikeout rate, but the last two right around 24%. Not very closer like, but he definitely counts as the safe for now part. The Marlins signed him to be the closer, and I don't see another threat. So are we good to just move quickly past Pete Fairbanks and say he safely has the job? He's just not amazing.
Yeah, I think that's the thought here. I don't know how much you can read into bullpen usage in spring, but they did kind of go with all of their high leverage relievers last night, and they had Fauché pitch the ninth and Fairbanks pitched the eighth, which I hope that doesn't mean anything. But I mean, the way we saw that Marlins bullpen play out last year, I don't know. They could mix and match Fairbanks and Fauché, which would be super annoying because yeah, Fairbanks has lost some velocity and strikeout rate, but he's still a really good reliever, and he's added pitches to help himself out. So yeah, I for now I'm safe on Fairbanks, but yeah, it's probably something to monitor because that Marlins bullpen last year was very annoying, especially when how well Ronnie Henriquez was pitching.
Right, who unfortunately went down with an injury. Yeah. The next safe for now, but not fully trustworthy closer, I've gone with the Orioles with Ryan Helsley here. You could perhaps say that Helsley is more or less as trustworthy as Devin Williams, who had an off year last year, except Devin Williams under the hood looked totally fine, whereas Ryan Helsley's under the hood numbers did back up as well. Do you think it's fair to leave Helsley in this category? No doubts that he has the job on opening day, but if some of his struggles from last year carry over, there could be a change.
Yeah, and they have, I know, Andrew Kittredge is going to start the year in the IL, but it sounds like it's going to be a short stint for Kittredge. So he'll be back, and I think he's someone who could, be a closer in this league, especially how well he pitched last year. So if Helsley does struggle to begin with, there's concern there. That said, he hadn't pitched since March 8th, but Helsley did pitch, I think 2 nights ago. Looked great. I think he's similar to Hoffman in that kind of Hoffman territory where I believe in a bounce back there. And yeah, they're going to give him every chance to hold on to that role in Baltimore.
All right, next guy here could debatably have been in the previous category. That's the Reds with Emilio Pagan. I just don't know if he counts as proven and elite. He certainly counts as safe. And if he pitches like he did last year, extremely safe. It's just year-to-year volatility with him, but I'm pretty sure you can be pretty happy with Pagan. He's right around the Jeff Hoffman level of, I think it's going to work. I'm not 100% sure, but definitely the guy. And all he needs to do is keep pitching like he has recently.
Yeah, I think as long as, he does what he did last year, as long as that stuff remains, I think he's fine. A little bit of a, there's always a home run risk, and then especially pitching in Cincinnati, that can be an issue. But even last year, he allowed 10 home runs and had a good season. So I'm not too concerned about him, about Pagan, but yeah, he's a little bit below some of the rest of those guys on this list we've talked about.
I'm going to skip over one team here and go to the White Sox with Seranthony Dominguez. I think firmly fit in this category. He was signed to be the closer. Not an amazing pitcher, but probably, I don't even know if he's the best pitcher in the White Sox bullpen. There is a Grant Taylor there, but they're trying to use him in a multi-inning role. So I think if you just want guaranteed saves from your closer, Seranthony Dominguez, not a bad shout, or are you pretty worried that he could lose the job pretty quickly?
Yeah, I don't think he's gonna lose the job quickly because, yeah, like you said, Taylor. They don't seem to have interest in Taylor being a closer there. And Jordan Leisure pitched well in the second half last year, but I don't. Again, they probably would prefer him in the eighth inning. So yeah, I think Dominguez gets a pretty good, good run there, good leash. If you're drafting him, your whip's probably going to take a hit, but you're going to get saves, and he's probably not going to wreck your ERA, and he's going to add strikeouts. So yeah, there's his value right now is solid. Where I'm fine taking him, around or after pick 200.
All right. And if you've been following along alphabetically, maybe you can guess the team that I skipped here. That is the Royals. I think Carlos Estevez still counts as safe for now, but not fully trustworthy, although we might need a different adjective. I am very worried about Estevez's loss of 5 or 6 ticks of velocity, but the Royals haven't indicated that they're about to make a change, right? So, how do you handle this situation?
Yeah, I think they should be more alarmed because they're talking about how last year it was the same thing, but it really wasn't because last year he was still like 93, 94 at this time, and he's 89, 90 now. That's a pretty big gap. And not even just that. I mean, the other night he walked 3 guys. He couldn't even find the zone. He's gotten one whiff like all spring. It's just, and we're less than a week away from opening day. I don't know how they can feel confident about him being their closer on opening day. And like he's not going to magically just start throwing 7 miles per hour harder. Maybe he will. I just don't see that happening. So I guess the good news for him is that the competition behind him isn't as exciting as it might have been, like a couple years ago. Like Lucas Erceg's stuff has been diminishing. Same with Matt Strom. Still better than what Estevez is bringing to the table at this point, but yeah, that situation feels like a mess. So
Yeah.
I'm been avoiding Estevez even before we saw the velo, and yeah, this doesn't do anything to help, obviously.
Yeah, I think that checks out. So does technically probably fit in this category, but really hoping that I end up with a different closer and not Carlos Estevez.
Yeah.
That does it for the guys who I've said are safe for now. There are a few other closers who are pretty safe, I think. I've got a mini category here where I've called them unconfirmed but probable closers. And as far as I know, none of these 3 teams has actually officially 100% named their guy. I'm going to pair the first 2 of them because I think the situation's pretty similar. The
Mm.
Giants with Ryan Walker and the Pirates with Dennis Santana. It's the best reliever in both those bullpens, guys who got most of the saves last year. As far as I could tell, no official word from the team that it is going to be those guys, but I'm pretty sure that they are the guy. I'm just not all that sure how good they are. Is that an accurate reading of the situation with both of those?
Yeah, and I think if you wanna choose between one of these two, I feel a lot better about Walker just because there's the competition there is very scarce. I think Walker, it's only himself that can lose that role. Whereas Santana does have, like, Gregory Soto's got he's got closer experience. I'm still a big fan of Mason Montgomery if he can get his command under control. So, um, yeah, I feel better about Walker here, but both him and Santana should be the closer by default, at least to start the year. Both guys are not, they're probably not best suited to be closers, but by the situation right now, they're going to be their team's closer.
All right. And the third team in this category is the Detroit Tigers with Kenley Jansen, who we did have sort of word from the team. We had, I guess, sort of
Yeah.
conflicting words at various points in the offseason. Soon after he was signed, the president of baseball operations, Scott Harris, said there's at least 3 or 4 closer types on the roster and wasn't going to name Jansen as the guy. But then in early February, the manager, AJ Hinch, said that Jansen was the favorite to close. Again, I'm not quite counting this as he's been given the job because Will
Mhm.
Vest and Kyle Finnegan at this point in Jansen's career might be just as good as him. How are you playing this situation? It's a little tough to figure out because if we had a little bit more certainty,
Yeah.
Jansen very much goes in that previous category. He's safe for now, but not fully trustworthy. But does he belong there yet?
No, I think this is like he's on the fringe between that last category, and he's kind of in his own category here where we haven't seen the Tigers ever, or at least since AJ Hinch has been there, they've never had a guy like Jansen who can be or is a full time closer. So we have to kind of see how Hinch plays things because they did bring back Finnegan. They gave him a good chunk of money as well. And Vest was great for most of the year in the closer role as well. So there are two other options, but I do still think Jansen's going to get 60+% of the save share there, which he should get 25 saves, and his even as he gets older, velocity is not a big thing to him anymore. Strikeout rate's dipped, but he's still gonna be solid with ratio help and get you a bunch of saves. And it's a good situation in Detroit for him too. It's a good ballpark, good league division context as well.
Yeah, something that I did in TGFBI that I'm curious about your thoughts on. I took Kenley Jansen as one of my two real closers. I forget who the other one was off the top of my head. It was somebody in the Palencia, Hoffman, Pagan type tier. So I had two in that range. And then I backed up Jansen in the reserve rounds with both Will Vest and Kyle Finnegan. Is that something you would do? And if so, how long are you holding on to Vest and Finnegan before saying, all right, Jansen's the guy, I should drop those guys for interesting starting pitchers?
Yeah, I'm especially, they're not going to break break the bank ADP wise with Vest and Finnegan. And yeah, I think you in deeper leagues, you can take the trio and see how things play out. It's similar to I think with the Rays situation, which we'll get to in a little bit, but that's something I feel confident about with the Rays. Like three guys who I think in that bullpen you could get fairly cheap considering the upside they bring, and then you just you draft them, see how things play out, and make moves as necessary. So yeah, I still think you probably end up dropping at least one of them, but maybe you even hang on to Jansen and Finnegan, and if they are splitting saves, at least you're getting the whole Tiger save share. So it's a good situation to have.
Yeah, I'm hoping to be able to drop one or two of those guys before too long, but I figured it was maybe a better use of the spot just in case Jansen blows up right away. That versus a very late round starting pitcher flyer.
Yeah.
I could end up being wrong, but figured it was worth trying. Up next, we have a category with only one team in it. That is a team that has a clear closer, but he's currently hurt. Often there are more of those, but only one right now. This is, of course, the Astros with Josh Hader, who will be the guy if and when he's healthy. And he has been throwing bullpens, so maybe we'll see him in mid-April even. That is possible. But I'm quite worried about a guy who ended last year on the IL with a shoulder injury and now is dealing with biceps issues. Brian Abreu, very clearly the guy until Hader returns. But again, is Hader going to come back in mid-March and be 5.5 months of a closer, or is he going to have 3 setbacks and return in September and then get hurt again? Do you draft Brian Abreu? Do you draft Josh Hader? Do you let somebody else deal with it?
Man, yeah, this situation, I have drafted Hader a little bit because of just how much he's fallen. I don't feel great about it. But there is the tantalizing upside. If Hader is healthy by mid-April, then you get pretty much a full season from him. So considering he doesn't pitch 60+ innings anyway, so I think right now I'm okay drafting Hader. He's going to throw again this weekend. I'm assuming if this weekend goes well, he might get into maybe he gets into a late spring training game, or at least he'll be able to start his rehab fairly soon. As far as Abreu goes, I think his ADP has gone up to a point where I'm not that comfortable with him, especially if he's just going to get 2 weeks of saves. And then, he hasn't looked great this spring either. And I don't know if it might be a health thing, or maybe he's just taking it easy, but his stuff's down. His results have been kind of all over the place. That said, I mean, this bullpen, they already lost Bennett Souza. I mean, they've lost other guys. It's kind of in shambles at this point. So Abreu's pretty safe to open the year as the closer, but I'm just the risk with where he's going, like inside the top 200. I'm not too excited about that.
Yeah, 5 strikeouts against 7 walks in 7 innings for Brian Abreu this spring. So maybe a situation best avoided. I believe that means that's 21 teams so far, unless I've forgotten one, who have a real closer, at least for now. I've got 9 more teams on here who I don't know who's going to close. And I've got them in a couple different categories because only one of these teams, I think, has actually outright said they're going to use a committee. I would expect a couple more, and maybe you're aware of a couple who have basically admitted that it's going to be a committee. But I'm pretty sure the Rays are the only team who have said there's going to be a committee at this point. We like Griffin Jacks. Garrett Clevenger also in the mix. Edwin Uceda eventually once healthy. I would love Griffin Jacks if he was in one of the previous categories where they said he's going to be our guy,
Right.
but they have pretty much explicitly said we're going with a committee. So does that mean we should pay up for Griffin Jacks anyway, just because he's good and will probably be the guy who gets the majority of the saves?
I'm in that category, or I think, yeah, I think I'm okay paying for Jax as like the 15th, 16th closer off the board. It's a guy last year we were drafting just expecting him to be a ratio booster and strikeout guy. And now add in, I think he's at least closer option 1A there, so that should be good for 15 saves as long as he's healthy. 15 saves. Probably more because, you look at the options behind him. It's Garrett Clevenger. It would probably be the left-handed option depending on matchups. But he might be the only lefty in that bullpen, depending on if Ian Seymour makes it or, if they add another lefty. So if Clevenger's the only lefty there, it probably limits him in the 9th inning. Usaid is going to be out until at least mid-April, maybe later. Brian Baker's the other guy who probably early on would be the other right-handed option to factor into the 9th, but I don't, there's a huge gap between Jax and Baker, stuff wise, potential wise. So yeah, and we've seen Jax's value. I mean, his ADP has been steadily rising, so it does make him a little bit more expensive, but I've been okay with grabbing him, especially, you can pair him with one of the safer, maybe less upside, like a Robert Garcia later. And I feel like that's not a terrible, 2 closer option pairing where you're not spending a ton, but you should get enough saves and the ratio should look pretty good afterwards as well.
All right, so Griffin Jack's still a pretty interesting option. Also, I realized I forgot to put one team down here. So it's 20 teams with clear closers to start, 10 who are up in the air to some extent or other. The Rays, we've said, are the one team who basically said it's a committee, but you could still maybe draft Jacks anyway. 9 more teams, and I split these into 2 groups based on whether or not the team projects to be at least around 500 or not. So I think the teams that actually are going to win a decent amount of games probably would be the priority bullpens here to take a shot at, starting with the Brewers, who theoretically could be one of the best teams in baseball. They tend to be, even though the projections say they won't be. But the Brewers, have they given any clear indication if it's going to be Trevor McGill or Abner Uribe or a committee?
So Pat Murphy's being annoying about this, and like the way he's talking about how, the Brewers we're just this scrappy team and like everyone can be in any role. And like, I understand that, but like last year for the first, up until August, until McGill got hurt, things were working out really well for that bullpen with McGill in the 9th, Uribe in the 8th, Koenig in the 7th, and whatever, Ashby, Grant Anderson before them. So I personally think that McGill should be the closer to start the year, Uribe in the 8th. And based on spring, McGill's look better than Uribe. And the other day, again, I don't know how much you can put into, bullpen usage in the spring, but they kind of did that where they had McGill, and it was coming after Brandon Woodruff. So McGill pitched first, then Uribe, then Koenig, then Grant Anderson. And I wonder if that's kind of the leaning, to start the season, where, that worked out for them for the, up until August last year. I think that's how they should start as long as McGill's healthy. I feel, better about McGill than Uribe a little bit. They're both like in safe. If you're in a holds league, you want both of those guys no matter what. But I just feel, a little bit more consistency with McGill when he's healthy than with Uribe, who can just, any given night can kind of lose his command a little bit. So again, they're still hard to draft because they're both going really high, and I've seen Uribe going above McGill,
Right.
especially recently. So I'm definitely like having a hard time drafting Uribe, but McGill, if he falls to a certain point, yeah, there's the upside there makes me interested in seeing. He had 30 saves last year. If you can do it again this year, you're getting a huge discount. So, yeah, and it's for those who want to be a little bit risky and take chances. I think McGill's an option for you, but Uribe is it's a little too high for me at this point. The way he's kind of taken over as going ahead of McGill, and I think Uribe went for. It was interesting in Tout. They both went back to back. So McGill
Right.
went first, yeah, and then Uribe went after him, and I think Uribe went for maybe $1 more, which is probably just because he went after McGill. But still, it's interesting to see that like them going back to back like that.
Yeah, it looks like it was actually McGill for 10, and then Uribe came in for 12 right
12. Okay,
after. So the NL Tout Wars room has decided Uribe is going to be the closer. I'm not sure I fully agree with that. Maybe avoiding the situation is the way to go. Two more teams who I've said are actually worth trying to figure out here because they're projecting for a decent win total. The Arizona Diamondbacks. Paul Sewald or Kevin Ginkel, probably the top two options. Again, committee could be the way that any of these teams go. Do you have a lean to either of those two, or do you leave it alone because you think a committee is a real potential worry here?
About a month ago, I was just leaving this alone, and I don't think a committee's a worry. The way that Tori Lavulu has been talking about it, it sounds like he wants to have a guy. He just does. He's not. I think the most recent comment from him is they don't want to name a guy until the regular season, but they want a guy there. And I think Kevin Ginkel is not going to be the guy because he's been so bad this spring, and results have been bad, stuff has been bad. I don't know what's happened to him, but he's just fallen off. And Paul Sewald wasn't great last year. He was hurt for most of the year, and even dating back to 2024, he was shaky. Not someone who I loved to roster, but I feel like I've been able to get him like the last pick in a lot of drafts. I feel very confident that he's going to open the year as the closer for Arizona. The way he's throwing the ball this spring, he looks fine. He looks better than the other guys, I guess, is the main thing. And they've talked highly about him. So, the question then becomes when AJ Puck returns the end of May or early June, does Puck take that role back, or is Sewald able to, hang on for that long? So something to keep an eye on. But I think Sewald, his ADP hasn't gone higher. I think he's just someone to throw a dart on late in drafts and see what happens, because I don't expect Seattle Mariners Paul Sewald at this point, but he shouldn't be someone who totally wrecks your ratios. And yeah, that Diamondbacks team's good enough to win games, and he should get a good amount of saves to start the year at least.
All right, so that explains why you went for Paul Sewald for $4 in NL Tout Wars. Not yet confirmed, but could be one of the better names in this final couple segments here. I put the Rangers as the third team in this section because, again, I think they're going to win a decent amount of games, and they haven't really offered 100% clarity, right? This is still unconfirmed whether or not it's going to be Robert Garcia or Chris Martin or, again, potentially a committee.
Yeah, they've I think the most recent talk is that they've named those two guys as options, which to me is I'm heavily leaning towards Robert Garcia because Martin has his own red flags, and the fact that Martin's never closed out games, he's never wanted or there's been talk about him not wanting to close out games in the past because he should have been the closer last year. I don't know why. And I know he dealt with some health and injuries, but and then he had a thoracic outlet injury this offseason, and he was 95% sure he wasn't even going to come back and pitch, but now he is back. So I don't know, just a lot of concern with Martin. And Garcia is not a great closer, but I feel there's some safety there, especially if he does win the world role to start the year. I think he can, especially there's not a ton of competition behind him, so I think he can run with that role if he does start the year in the closer role. It's not a ton of high upside there, but you're going to get saves from him in Texas, and his value is still pretty cheap. So if, again, like I mentioned, pairing him and Jax, if you want to, do something like that, that makes sense. But yeah, I think Garcia is pretty safe there compared to where Chris Martin. I don't know. I don't know what's left there.
Would you even have said Robert Garcia belongs with the Ryan Walkers and Dennis Santanas of the world, or do you think he
Yeah.
correctly is in a lower category here?
I think based on the fact that they haven't named him, it's a little bit different. And, they haven't named Santana or Walker, but it's really obvious that those guys are going to be the
Right.
closers to start the year. So I think, yeah. And Martin he could close. He could have closed last year. I don't know why they'd never trusted him. And I know there's a new manager there, so that might play into it. But I just feel like the preferred option is probably Garcia in the ninth and Martin in the eighth. Maybe matchups will change that day to day, but I think Garcia gets the bulk of the saves.
All right, sounds good. We've got one final category here, which has 6 teams in it. I've called this category Who Knows, Who Cares? Because these are 6 of the worst
Six.
teams in
Oof.
baseball. And if you're in a shallow league, say a 12-team league, well, everybody can have 2 closers and nobody needs to get anybody from any of these 6 teams. But of
Mm-hmm.
course, if you're in a deeper league, you care about all 30 bullpens. So I am going to ask you for each of these, is there anyone who's even worth drafting at this point, or are all the options bad and they're not going to save any games anyway? So let somebody else try to figure it out. Starting with the Angels, who had a couple injured options in Robert Stevenson and Ben Joyce. They also have Kirby Yates, Jordan Romano, and Drew Pomerantz. You chasing anybody from there or leaving them alone?
I think Yates is. I'm avoiding Yates because he's going higher than the other ones. But if you're in a really deep 15 teamer, I would take a chance on Pomeranz. Again, left-handed, but they do have other lefties in that bullpen, so he doesn't need to, just match up with lefties. And I think skill set wise, Pomeranz is the best of that trio last year between Yates and Romano. So I would take a shot on Pomeranz. No one's really giving him a lot of love right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Not having the best spring, as many walks as strikeouts, but he's really the only one in that bullpen who pitched well last year. So
Yeah.
if you have to take an Angels closer, maybe look his direction. I've got the A's up next. A lot of possible options here. Justin Sterner got some love. It could be Hogan Harris, Scott Barlow, Mark Leiter. Are you bothering to chase an A's closer?
I think similarly, like with the Angels, I don't want to chase one of the guys going higher, or Mark Leiter's kind of crept up, and then it's not like too high, but he's still the first athletic reliever outside of Justin Sterner maybe going. So I think like a Hogan Harris, again lefty, but there's something, if there's left-handed matchups in the ninth inning, you get some saves from Hogan Harris, and he's been the best of that group this spring, at least stuff wise. You've seen an uptick in his fastball velocity, so kind of interested in Hogan Harris, and again, not going to cost you much. So late round dart, see what happens.
All right. Up next is the Cardinals. Kind of a surprise to see them in this section. Not normally one of the worst teams in the league, but I'm pretty sure they're going to be down there this year.
Yeah.
They've got Riley O'Brien, Jojo Romero, Ryan Stanek, Matt Swanson. Are you taking a shot on anyone in the Cardinals? Is this just going to be a committee? What's going on there?
I don't. Yeah, there could be a committee. They're not talking about what their plans are really. They just keep mentioning all 4 of these guys as potential options. Again, I think given that it could be any one of the 4, I've been leaning towards the cheapest one, which has been Stanek, and I get it because he's been terrible the last couple of years. The stuff's always looked good for him, so it's not like it's exciting that his stuff still looks great, but he's kind of like Joe Kelly, where stuff's always great, but the results never there. There's obviously risk with Stanek, but he's been super cheap, and Romero could get traded at any minute, and O'Brien doesn't strike out, he doesn't miss any bats, so I'll take a chance on Stanek for nothing.
Any love for Matt Swanson, who did have closer-like numbers last year? He just was a rookie and is probably behind the other guys in terms of seniority.
That's kind of where I'm at, where I think just the arbitration factor maybe could push him down the pecking order here, and he's got more of an ability to pitch multiple innings than I think the rest of this group. So I wonder if that leads him to being more of a fireman, multi-inning guy for them. So I love Swanson. Probably if he was the closer, I think we're talking about, a top 20 option. But yeah, I just between seniority here and I think Swanson probably isn't the closer to start the year, but could get into that role eventually.
All right, we got three more here. The Nationals, I think, very much in the who knows, who cares territory this year. Don't think they're going to win many games at all. And I don't think I'm very excited about Clayton Beeter or Cole Henry or PJ Poulin or CNL Perez. Are you bothering to even throw any darts in this bullpen?
I really want to believe in Clayton Beeter, but the command is just so atrocious. The stuff's great. The command is just not there. And his spring numbers look good, but the command is still a mess. And I don't know if the Nationals can really trust him. Cole Henry is super low upside, but if you're desperate for saves, I guess you could do worse than take a shot on Henry. The lefties I'm probably staying away from, but another guy in that bullpen who's maybe not even making the roster, but Gus Farland's looked good this spring, or at least in March. I think Gus Farland could be a guy who could sneak into that role eventually if the Beeter Henry duo fail.
I saw someone draft Gus Farland very late recently, and I assumed that they just got Louis Varland's name wrong, but I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, they're brothers.
Two more teams here. The most who knows who cares every single year in the bullpen here is the Rockies. Seth Halverson or Victor Vodnik are available. I certainly don't want to ever put a Rockies pitcher in my lineup if I can help it, though. Are you bothering to throw a dart at either of those two?
No, I think Halverson's been having just a horrible spring. I don't think he's even going to make the roster. Vodnik probably starts the year in the role, but I think it was you were talking about it last week how the Rockies' schedule is not very favorable.
Yeah,
for
they don't
relievers.
have a full Monday to Sunday
Yeah.
week where it's all home or all away until July. So if you're going to use a reliever all week, you are guaranteeing that you have to take on at least 3 potential home games every single week.
Yeah, and that even for just the relievers themselves, like because their stuff changes from pitching in Coors versus pitching somewhere else, so it's a kind of a nightmare situation for them. But yeah, I think Vodnik probably opens the year in the role. I like Juan Mejia there. I just don't know if he, again, even as much as I like him, it just would rather stay away from Colorado.
All right, and the final team in our who knows who cares category and the final team in all of baseball is the Minnesota Twins, who also should be near the bottom of the win totals this season. Taylor Rogers, Justin Topa, Cole Sands are the options here. I mean, I'm a little intrigued by Rogers just because he's had closer experience in Minnesota in the past and nobody else looks like anything, but no certainty that he has the job and no certainty that the Twins are going to win 70 games. So I don't know if I should be very into him. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, he probably by default opens the year in the role because of the closer history in Minnesota as well. Probably plays a factor. But yeah, I would not be excited about it. But if you're desperate for saves, yeah, that's probably the dart to throw here. His fastball has just gotten his sinker is just really bad at this point. It's one of the worst fastballs in baseball. So he's gonna have to lean on that slider sweeper. But the options behind him, like Topa's not great. Sands is interesting, but he throws like 7 pitches and can work multiple innings. So I don't know what his role is. Eric Orzi is a kind of interesting option there, or Cody Funderburk, but again, they don't have a ton of experience. So yeah, Rogers is probably the guy to start the year. Can he keep the role? I doubt it, but we'll see.
All right. Well, that does it for our look at every single bullpen in baseball. We managed to get it in a reasonable-ish time. Seems like about 20 closers guaranteed to start the year, and a good handful of those final 10 should have a real closer and not just a committee, although not too many of them are all that interesting. But thank you very much for going through all that with me, Rick. Thank you also to everybody who hung out in the chat. Sorry I didn't really get to any questions today. I knew we had just a very packed rundown with every single team on the list today. But thanks again, Rick. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, you can find me on socials at I am Rick Graham. You can find my work over at PitcherList.com. I just put out yesterday an updated reliever rankings for the the rest of you who are drafting this weekend and Monday and Tuesday. But yeah, then looking forward to next week. Finally, we're just a week away from opening day here.
Yeah, only a couple days until everything we said today is proven wrong. So very excited about that. Thanks again, Rick. Thank you to everybody who hung out in the chat, and thank you to our sponsor, Fantrax. The RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast will be back tomorrow.